Hello, and welcome to another episode of This All Stops When We Start Talking About It. Today, I'm going to delve into case number two. And just as in the first case, I will not be mentioning the names of my clients or the opposing parties or any of the children involved in this case. I will be mentioning the names of the government actors, and there aren't many in this one. Mostly, we'll be talking about Judge William Furse. I also wanted to say that I will be discussing matters involving children. However, my client has given me a waiver to speak about that. He's agreed to allow me to waive attorney-client privilege and discuss these matters. And with the selective exclusion of their names, I will be relaying the details as they occurred. All right, we're going to jump into case number two. And I know what you're probably all thinking. Oh, more Dolores County goodies. No, we're going to give them a break for a week or two. And we're going to delve into some stuff that happened in Montezuma County. There's really only one government actor involved in this one, and that's Judge William Furse. And we'll be talking about him. We'll be talking about what happened in his courtroom, what he did to me, to my clients, and through his actions and through his pleadings. And I'm allowed to do so under my First Amendment. There is a statute in the state of Colorado that prohibits retaliation against judges. It's bizarre. There's no similar statute that prohibits a judge from retaliating against us, which effectively, I think, makes the judge above the law. But I guess there are some people who are above the law. How about that? Anyways, this retaliation statute says I'm prohibiting from making threats towards the judge, threats of violence or threats to harm, as well as harassing him. And I can also tell you, under the harassment statute, there's a special exception carved out for First Amendment protected activity and expressing my political views, and that's precisely what I'm doing. However, if one of Judge Furse's friends in the district attorney's office wants to try and charge me, go ahead. At least I'll get some attention. I'll turn myself into the Montezuma County Jail just like I told Judge Furse I would do. So, and I understand why judicial immunity historically used to exist, but that was under a presumption that the people taking the bench were honest and forthright. What do you do when you have a group of dishonest judges? I don't know. Colorado's not doing too great of a job at that. And we'll talk about that at the end of this episode. I started representing my client in case number two, I think in 2016, 15, somewhere thereabouts. He came to me initially because he was having some issues with his ex-wife. His ex-wife did not live in the state. They had 3 children together. The children, I believe when he first initially came to me, were like 12, 8, and 9. Now him and his wife had a contentious case. They filed for divorce in 2012, long before I came into the picture. And had been going back and forth. Their case was in Montezuma County in front of Judge Douglas Walker, who's now retired. Uh, Basically, throughout the years, the mother had made a series of false allegations against my client over and over and over, claiming he was abusive to her, he was abusing the kids, meanwhile engaging in incredibly overt and blatant behavior that I would classify as what we colloquially are calling narcissistic behavior. I want to make it very clear, I am not a psychologist. I cannot make diagnoses. I'm just saying the types of behaviors that we're witnessing in the public, that we're seeing memes about. It's the kind of stuff she was doing. And my client was sort of out of his mind because he couldn't keep up with the constant barrage of attacks. And that's where someone like me comes in, because I'm very, very good at doing domestic violence law because I know how to combat abusive people. I learned how to navigate narcissistic type behaviors, and I learned the patterns that they use because they do have patterns. That's why I was a good domestic violence attorney. I could see them from case to case to case and know what was going on and how my client needed to respond to that. And I'm sure there's many of you watching that I represented that would agree with that. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But anyways, this gentleman came to me. She was making all kinds of threats. She was trying to manipulate the children to say they wanted to come with her. The oldest 2 children, who at that time, when I first got involved, I think were 12 and 9, or maybe somewhere thereabouts, were pretty much wanting to stay with the dad. They didn't really want anything to do with the mom. The mom had a series of husbands after she had divorced my client, and we heard rumors about things that were very concerning, stuff that CPS should have got involved in, but we didn't really know. And because my client had the children the majority of the time, he didn't really escalate that issue because the children weren't at the mom's house that often. Even when they would go with her, she would get upset with them if they wouldn't do what she wanted, and sometimes would just drop them back off One time she had come from Utah and was visiting her family in Farmington and had the children with her. And it was Thanksgiving and demanded my client come and pick the kids up because she didn't want them anymore. So my client did. He was put through the ringer with this woman. But because of the fact that, she only had parenting time once a month and she didn't take it all the time, I was like, hey, kind of just probably let it lie. I know it sucks. I know it's not ideal. I know your kids get tormented every time they go to their mom's house. I know the exchanges are always challenging, but sometimes in these cases, it's better to keep the case closed than it is to reopen it, because reopening it means you're going to have an onslaught of ridiculous attacks directed at you, and you're not going to get a lot of help from our courts, because our courts are not supposed to take a side in those types of cases. So if it's a criminal matter, then, criminal domestic violence issue, then, usually you can get maybe a little bit of help. Except for our officers really like to use the phrase, it's a civil matter, take it up with the judge whenever there's domestic violence or child abuse issues involved in family cases, because they don't want to get involved. So, hello, Jill, that's where I come into play. Take it up with the judge. That's why they hire me. They hire me to talk to their abusive exes, communicate with them. And I'm used to getting nasty emails and being called a bitch. I'm used to it. It happens. It's part of my job, I guess. But that's because I'm not willing to entertain what the opposing party wants. I'm not loyal to them. I represent my client. So it was just one of those things that came with the job, I guess. But anyways, I represented him over a period of years. Whenever she would periodically pop her head back up and make some kind of claim that he was abusing the children and the children were in fear for their lives. And the kids knew about all of this because the mom would pump it into their ears whenever she would have parenting time. We could always tell when she was about to do something, she'd suddenly start exercising every single minute of parenting time she could. And it usually was around tax time because she wanted to claim the children on taxes, even though she was in serious arrears on child support. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but if anybody owes you child support and they're in arrears by even one penny at the end of the calendar year, they are not legally allowed or entitled to claim the children on taxes. So that's a big problem in the family courts, because the court's like, well, you have to do the taxes this way. Oh, but if IRS gets involved, we're not going to help you. So you're on your own. It's a lot of fun. It's one of the banes of my existence of as a family law attorney. I hate IRS child support cases. They suck. Anyways, so that was pretty much my involvement with this gentleman until December of 2023. And at that point in time, Douglas Walker had retired. Judge Furse was assigned to this case. And there was a situation that happened at the beginning of December in 2023. Now, at this point in time, the parties had had three children. The oldest child had aged out of the system. He actually was on his own, and he didn't really see his mother for the last couple of years of his childhood. He got permission through the court because the mom was pretty horrible to him, and whenever he wasn't willing to go along with her attempts to set the father up for child abuse, she basically quit talking to her own child to punish him. I don't think they've spoken in over 4 years, which is sad, but that was her choice. But the younger two were still living with the father. Now, unbeknownst to me, the oldest child had, in the past, tried to utilize some of the tactics that the mother had taught to the child to get their way when they were upset with the dad. So, for example, whenever the dad wasn't willing to do something the child wanted, that child would claim that they were being abused by their father to school professionals. That had happened over a number of years. I wasn't aware of it because it didn't go through the court system, because it went to CPS, and CPS got to the point where they knew, apparently, according to my client, these kids were not in danger and that they were doing what they had been told to do by their mother. And those things didn't really go anywhere. Also, I said to my client, why didn't you tell me your kid was doing this to you? And he said, well, it was a private family matter, which, fair enough. He kept it out of the court until December of 2023. I don't remember the specific date. I want to say it was December 4th or 5th. The children of my client were on a school field trip from on a bus out of town, an out of town field trip, a multi-day field trip. And on that particular field trip, the oldest child got upset because they wanted more spending money on the trip. and found out that one of the step siblings, because they did have step siblings, had received additional spending money because that child has a father who is her father and gave her money in addition to my client and his wife giving the child money. So that child called demanding extra money from the stepmother, and they got into a pretty good argument. And the B word was thrown around by both of them, and the stepmother acknowledges that that shouldn't have happened, but it was thrown about by both of them. And while the child was on a field trip with the school, the child contacted their mother and basically said, "Okay, I'm ready to launch the assault against my dad." The field trip was ruined. Cortez police had to come and help uh, with the removal of that child from the bus, and my client voluntarily agreed to give her the kids over the weekend, to give the mom the kids over the weekend. Fine, you came all the way to Cortez and you caused this big hubbub and you got police involved. The youngest one didn't want to go. The older one did go. And over the weekend, the mother and the oldest child created a motion to restrict my client's parenting time, claiming a variety of child abuse allegations, claiming that my client shot animals in front of them, locked the cabinets so that they couldn't get food, denied them basic needs, medical services, that both that child and the younger child were self-harming. The mother and the child both had a history of writing very, very long messages. I believe the child's message to the judge was 14 pages long. Um, so they filed a motion to restrict parenting time. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's whenever there's a previous court order that allocates parenting time, which here there was. My client was the primary parent, with mother having 1 weekend per month. And suddenly she was arguing that there was something happening on my parent's parenting time that was posing imminent physical or emotional danger to her children, and that as a result, my client's parenting time should be restricted and the children should be turned over to her. Now, before this was granted, the mother went and withdrew the children from school. Early, it was before the end of the semester. Luckily, the teachers at Montezuma Cortez High School were amazing and were willing to help those children make sure they passed their classes, because they stopped going to school at that point in time. She wasn't given permission to remove the children from school, but she did it anyway. Um, I even got a phone call from Rico at the courthouse asking me what was going on. And I'm like, I have no idea. We didn't do this. She did it. Why are you asking me? Contact her. I don't know what to do. Anyways, so my client calls me in a panic. I haven't talked to him in a couple of years, and he's like, "Oh my God, like this, she's done it. She's done it." And every other time she tried this in the past, which is thoroughly in the court record, Douglas Walker knew exactly what this woman was doing and shut it down. Now, Judge Walker wasn't overly friendly. He wasn't a bad judge, but he wasn't overly friendly. He was firm. I wouldn't call him warm by any sense of the imagination. But Judge Walker knows the law, and he knew what was wrong. And he thoroughly documented mother's behaviors in the court record, which Judge Furse completely ignored when he granted a motion restricting my client's parenting time on the basis of 40 pages of unhinged accusations leveled at my client. Not a single piece of truth to any of it. But I told my client, hey, don't worry. Under the law, you're required to get a hearing within 14 days. And I know this sucks. I know it's Christmas time. It's really common that parents do this right before Christmas. It happens all the time. So, I know Judge Furse is new to the bench, but he can hopefully read the law, and I think he'll probably do the right thing. You have nothing to worry about. Boy, oh boy, was I wrong. Judge Furse started immediately issuing aggressive rulings against my client, which was strange because we hadn't filed anything. Demanding that because the mother had claimed my client was withholding stuff from the child, we turn over items to her, and also gave my client supervised visitation of the Pena Project, but then immediately granted the mother permission to take the children out of the state, making it so that he would have no visitation. We did have a hearing, and at that hearing, the judge did something very unusual. First of all, he did not require the mother to appear in person. So the child and the mother, along with the mother's husband, the stepfather of that child, appeared from a car in the state of Utah, all sitting in a car together, testifying by WebEx at this hearing. And I'm like, dude, judge, you took the children away from the state. If you rule in my client's favor, the kids are not going to come back. You've just essentially authorized this woman to kidnap these kids. Well, that hearing went on, and Judge Furse uh, let the oldest child testify. The younger child, nowhere to be seen. Never heard from her. Never had her testify. Oldest one, who was pissed at her dad, was all too happy to tell her dad in court exactly how she felt about him because he wouldn't give her money on this field trip. And basically made a series of allegations against him, implying like sexual things, child abuse, neglect, um, a variety of different things. That child was allowed to testify. It's highly unusual for a judge to allow a child to testify. But then, whenever I went to go cross-examine her, as I'm entitled to by the law, the judge stopped me and started yelling at me. I tried to prevent that child from testifying in the first place. I objected strongly to her even being part of this. And the judge overruled me and then wouldn't allow me to rebut any of her allegations. He didn't make a finding that my client had actually endangered the children, but he made a finding that the kids being at my client's house, based upon the words of his daughter and the mother, who had been saying the same lies she had been saying since 2012, was enough to permanently remove my client's children from him. And he did that at the end of December 2024, 2023. Excuse me. I don't know why he did that. It was devastating to my client. And I'm like, Judge, you're putting these kids in danger. After they were removed from school, I don't believe they attended school for almost 2 months. They were truant. They had A's and B's at Cortez. Once they finally got enrolled in school in Utah, I don't think they passed in their classes. In fact, I know that they had to do summer school to make up. They were in sports and activities at Cortez. They went to having none of that. We didn't even know where they lived. Even though the judge took the kids away from my client, he authorized him to have unsupervised visitation once a month. I think that was sort of like a get back. Like, okay, cool. She had once a month all these years. So now you get it, even though there was absolutely no basis to do what I did to you. On January 5th, which was an interesting day if you watched case one, a lot of stuff happened to me on January 5th, coordinated attack. On January 5th, my client was supposed to have his first bout of parenting time. He drove all the way to Green River, Utah, and waited for the mother to deliver the children, who he hadn't seen since, I think, December 5th. She didn't bring them. We didn't know where they were living. She provided a false address to the court. And I had gotten a child and family investigator involved because I didn't know what else to do. I'm like, Judge, you're making the wrong choice. You're making the wrong choice. Why are you doing this? And I'm like, okay, he hates my guts. I know that he's doing this because he doesn't like me. Okay, fine. Let's get somebody else in here who can help. So when we couldn't find her, we didn't know where she was. I forgot to mention in the hearing, the child had alluded that she was suicidal. So the judge sort of told her, if you're suicidal, you don't have to go to your dad's house. So here we now have kid threatening suicide, and we have no way to find this child. So I sent the mother an email, and I basically told her, hey, you don't have authority to interfere in this guy's parenting time. You don't have authority to override the court order. You haven't told us where you live. I don't have any other choice. I'm including the child and family investigator in this because I thought maybe the CFI can talk some sense into this lady so we can make sure these kids are okay. CFI at the time was Tisha Strawn. She got removed from the case later, but she didn't help. She removed herself from the case later. She found out there was a conflict of interest with the mother. And so she did remove herself from the case, but she didn't help us get the kid back or find them or anything. The oldest child wouldn't talk to my client by telephone. The younger one would, but my client could tell that her messages were being scrutinized and guarded. And they were not like her. They were messages that were probably coming from the mother or the older child. And so um, we didn't know what to do. I told my client, listen, your kids need to be assessed. They need to be evaluated. We filed for a motion to have them mentally evaluated. And the judge did grant that and said the mother had to get them evaluated. She didn't even, he granted that in December. He didn't even schedule anything by January. So my client was able to arrange for them to be assessed at Access in Cortez and filed a motion for that. And that's when the mother started claiming that the email I sent her on January 5th was email harassment. So I provided a copy of that entire email to Judge Furse. Here it is. And I figured he'd be like, okay, this woman's batshit crazy. Excuse my language. She's clearly lying, and I made a big mistake. I really, really, really messed up. I'm going to undo this right now. I'm going to get these kids back to Cortez. I'm going to get them help. Instead, he yelled at me in a court hearing and called me antagonistic when I wasn't speaking, started disparaging me and talking poorly about me, and then prohibited me from talking to the mother, requiring my client, who's a victim of domestic abuse, to engage with his ex wife if he wanted to speak to his children. And then he set us for another hearing down the road to see what happened. That was the first bomb that was thrown in my client's way. And I don't understand why you'd put children in danger simply because you hate a lawyer. Any judge that's willing to do that doesn't deserve to be on the bench. And if you want to know why I think Judge hates me, I'll tell you a couple different reasons why. I worked for William Furse back in 2014. He hired me at the district attorney's office. I had my solo practice, and there was a woman there named Deborah. Can't remember her last name, but she was having breast cancer treatment. She was a deputy DA, and they needed somebody to fill in. So Judge Furse, who was the district attorney at the time, hired me to come on board part-time, which was total nonsense. It's supposed to be 20 hours a week. Yeah, right. I was working like 60 hours a week there, trying to keep up with the 20 hours a week in court. He did offer me a full-time position at $45,000 a year, and I said no thanks. And anyways, I thought we were cool. Fast forward to 2015, I had another divorce case where I represented another male domestic violence victim. And in the hearing in that case, not this case, totally different case, it had been relayed that the wife and the other attorney had not only stolen my client's private medical records from a pharmacy, but they had also, the attorney who was representing the wife was also the attorney for CARS, the drug testing facility. And he issued a subpoena from himself as her attorney to himself as the director of the facility without serving me a copy, and authorized my client's biological samples to be tested without his authorization, and then disseminated his medical records, which I turned in as felony theft of medical records because it was under Title 18. Judge Furse convened a grand jury for a number of months that I testified in a number of times. And they voted to indict the attorney and the ex-wife. And then Judge Furse told me he wasn't going to prosecute them because he was worried about how he would look if he went after an attorney who had committed a crime. That's my first ding with Judge. That was strike number one with Judge Furse. Strike came with the situation with Josiah Forkner, who was the former director of social services. I'm not sure if you're aware, but he was not a good person. He committed numerous violations of the law, including some predatory type of things. And nobody was doing anything about it. So I, back in 2018, arranged for some of the victims to have meetings with Will Furse in a private location with advocates so that they could get justice. Will Furse interviewed them, including some of the women, and then told me he wasn't going to prosecute Mr. Forkner for everything he had done because the women said too much when they were questioned. So that was strike number two with me. We're looking at strike number three. Now, I want you to know, William Furse is aware that every time he has submitted his name for consideration to a judicial position, I have written emails to Governor Polis begging him not to appoint him, mostly because I don't want him presiding over families and children. because of the things that I'm talking about in this case and what I'm going to continue telling you about. If you are a judge who is hell bent on destroying families to prove a point, you need to be removed from office. So if Jeremy Reed or any other prosecutor wants to interpret this as harassment, go ahead. I'll turn myself in because I feel so strongly about this that I'm going to talk about it. If you are so jaded and bitter that one woman is a better lawyer than you, that you're going to deliberately break the law and hurt innocent people to give her a show or to put her in her place, you don't only deserve to be removed, you deserve prison. That's child abuse. I know I'm stumbling over my words because I'm angry. This shouldn't have happened, and it only happened because of the pride of an egotistical judge. And that's where we're going to end it today because I'm mad now. We'll be back for part two because it gets worse. I want to take a brief moment to explain how judges are appointed to the bench in the state of Colorado, just so everyone's aware. Basically, when there's a judicial vacancy, there is a group in every district called a judicial nominating commission. And we have one in our district. These are the individuals who are currently on that panel. Now, those individuals, basically, whenever a judicial vacancy comes open, people submit their names for consideration. They apply to be considered. And basically, those people look over their professional record, they look at them, they interview them, and then they make recommendations to Governor Polis. Governor Polis is not required to follow the recommendations of the nominating commission, although I would imagine he defers pretty heavily to them. That being said, I do know that there was a trend that Governor Polis tried to establish of appointing liberal leaning female judges for part of his term. Some of those judges are great, and some of them have thus been since been removed. Like, for example, what happened in the 6th Judicial District, where we had that female judge removed. But essentially, it's a way for the governor to basically get some information from a panel of citizens, which is great if it's a varied panel of citizens. It wasn't a few years back, I can tell you that. It was people in positions of power or relatives of theirs. But I think it's gotten kind of cleared out, and I think it's probably a good cross section of people in the community, which is great. Once a judge is appointed to the bench, then they come up for retention every either 2 or 4 years. I believe it's 2 years for county court judges, maybe, and 4 years for district court judges. I may have that wrong, but that's basically the Judicial Performance Commission. Basically, whenever it's election time and there's a judge up for retention vote, basically reviews appeals that the judge's orders that were taken, goes and observes them in the courtroom, basically interviews individuals if individuals know the meetings are happening so they can get feedback, looks at the judicial surveys that are filed to the Judicial Performance Commission, and makes a recommendation that comes out in the little blue book we all get before the election on whether or not a judge should be retained or whether they shouldn't be retained. And it's only been fairly recently that there have been some votes of non-confidence against judges. I'm sort of hoping that that will happen in Montezuma County and Dolores County so we can clear out the fluff and get some decent people in there. But basically, the Judicial Performance Commission for Montezuma County, Dolores counties, consists of these individuals. So if you're interested in any of those things, I would strongly recommend that whenever there are openings for that position, that you go ahead and apply. I was actually on the Judicial Performance Commission, I think, for 2 election cycles. It's not a really onerous position. It usually we meet once or twice, and then we have to go watch court one day, which is always kind of fun. But that's basically it. But that's how we make those recommendations. The only way that the Judicial Performance Commission knows if there's things going wrong is if there are complaints made. So I would strongly urge you, if you've had an interaction with a judge in the 22nd Judicial District that you think should maybe be considered whenever the people are recommending whether or not to retain them, I would strongly urge you to go out and fill the Colorado Judicial Surveys out. And you can get those, I believe, at the office, coloradojudicialperformance.com, I believe is where you can do that. There's little click down menus and you can go 22nd district, Judge Clue or Judge Furse or Judge Margerson or Judge whomever it is. And you can leave reviews. You can also leave positive reviews. I've left positive reviews for certain judges when I feel like they've done a good job. And I've absolutely said, hey, they did me right. I think that this judge is great. So please start exercising that. That's the only way we're going to change the judiciary is if you all get involved. And it's almost morning, so I'm going to get off my soapbox. Just so you know, I film these best at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not entirely sure why, but my sleep schedule is completely all over the map. But I guess I'm back on the case because I'm tired of this. This shouldn't have happened to me. It shouldn't have happened to the people involved. And I'm not going to shut up until it gets fixed. That's been this all stops when we start talking about it. I hope more of you start talking with me. Have a good day. We'll see you on Sunday for part 2.